Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Qualifying is over at the Spanish Grand Prix. Charles Leclerc is on pole, but far from the only story of the day. Mercedes' revival seems to have continued this time around into the Saturday itself. Still a fair way off pole position, but Toto Wolff believes Mercedes now do fully understand what was causing their bouncing problem. They believe they're fully fixed it, it's not going to return for the rest of the season. And even Lewis Hamilton and George Russell saying they believe they can compete with the Ferraris tomorrow. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. We'll of course talk about qualifying here in a second, with both Aston Martins going out in Q1. Rather interesting really, the fact that, well, the green Red Bull comes through. Didn't really work out for them all that well though. Just wanted to mention kind of FP3 first of all. A relatively similar performance, of course, we saw last time out. That it was George Russell and Hamilton that looked rather good on kind of course, FP2 in Miami. FP3 very much fell away on the final day. So this time, the pace did seem to be there once again. Pierre Gasly again with a really difficult time. His car, just like the reliability of that Alpha Tauri, seems to be absolutely shambolic, to be honest. And even some other cars on the grid, there were plenty of issues today with kind of DRS activation, which even Max Verstappen ran into right at the end of the day. We'll dive into that here in a second. Did want to mention this though, because in FP3, of course, there were some long runs that were done. Some of the teams were trying things out, and Leclerc's long run pace did look somewhat better in FP3 than it was in FP2. So some indications that potentially the race pace of the Ferrari might be somewhat better than what we saw it indicated as it in FP2, because it seemed like despite the fact that the Red Bull was maybe a little bit off the pace in terms of quali pace, they seem to be faster in the race itself. Now, look, who knows tomorrow how easy it's going to be to overtake around here in Barcelona. With the new regulations, it should be easier. So I think Red Bull and Verstappen probably still favourites for the race, but still, time management is going to be an important issue tomorrow. And well, of course, race pace itself is another question mark too, what these cars are doing in qualifying. Also, this was noticed, right? The fact that Russell actually had the highest kind of straight line speed in FP3, indicating really that the Mercedes was running in a slightly higher engine mode than the others. So it maybe explains that the slight deficit or the slight gap that appeared once again, for them to the rest of the fields when they got into qualifying itself. But let's just dive straight into that then. So qualifying kicks off. These 5 drivers eliminated. Heartbreak for Alonso right in front of the home crowds. Surprising stuff really, right? Because the Alpine has been looking rather good the last few races. Not sure really what went wrong for Alonso here, why he couldn't be together at a good lap. But of course, in front of the home crowd, both Alonso and Sainz having a, difficult qualifying to say the least. But yeah, as we said, it's Vettel and Stroll both in those kind of new Aston Martins that, weren't really anywhere near the pace. So that was rather interesting, there's no doubt. Now, the top 5 going into with 5 minutes to go pretty much, I believe maybe Sainz or Leclerc ended up topping this session. But it actually might have been Verstappen, not really sure. But anyway, with 5 minutes to go, it was Russell and Hamilton P1, P2 here, right? So Mercedes all of a sudden looked super back in business, but when it went into Q3, well, certainly Leclerc especially pulled something pretty remarkable out the bag, as did Verstappen. But yeah, definitely seems like the Mercedes is much better than it was. And also that is the thing really about the way the Mercedes, effectively their season has been dealing with the bouncing problems, and all their focus has been dealing with that, right? And they've kind of been paused in terms of their other developments until they solve this issue. They now believe they have solved it, and now they can focus on reducing weight and other kind of aerodynamic tweaks, this type of stuff that the Ferrari and the Red Bull have been able to do over the last few races. The Mercedes haven't really been able to focus on that type of stuff, right? So I do wonder if Mercedes had brought this car they have right now to Bahrain at the start of the year, I think they probably would be on par with the top teams, or pretty much there and thereabouts. But it's just the fact that those other cars have kind of taken further steps in front of where Mercedes are, that they're of course going to have to further catch up. So they're still playing a catch-up game, obviously. But yeah, today was obviously much more promising for them. Now, Norris actually he made it into the top 10, like P7 or P8 or something, and then got his lap time deleted for track limits at turn 12. So good to see in a way they're kind of enforcing this much better than they have done, let's say, in previous years. But that does put him down to P11, right? So actually Daniel Ricciardo outqualifies Norris, I believe, for the first time this season. Both AlphaTauris with a very tough time here, and guanyu actually a long way back on his teammate, Valtteri Bottas. We'll see that too in just a second. Now, Q3 starters are very interesting, because Charles Leclerc had a spin right at the end of, sector 3 of his first attempt. That left Verstappen on pole with a pretty damn good time. Sainz a bit behind, Perez, Russell, Hamilton. This was kind of the top 5, and Leclerc failed to set a time first time. Now, of course, they go again for the second lap, and this is where Leclerc actually comes good. This final lap was absolutely phenomenal. A 1:18.7 was a monster lap, 3/10 ahead of Verstappen. Not sure how close Verstappen would have got if his DRS worked. We'll see that here in a second. But yeah, this was easily good enough for pole. The remarkable thing about this to me is that Carlos Sainz in the same car was 0.4 of a second off Charles Leclerc. So just goes to show that Sainz is struggling, especially in front of his home crowd. He's going to be pretty gutted with that one. But yeah, Leclerc obviously on fire right now. He takes the pole position for tomorrow's race. Of course, a race where pretty much 80-90% of the time it's won by a car on the front row. Pretty much 70% of the time the race is won by a car in pole position. So we'll see if that reflects tomorrow. But of course, tire degradation has been the key discussion, and the Red Bull seem to have them in the bag right now compared to the Ferrari as the race progresses. But yeah, apparently the issue for Verstappen was he said on the radio, I'm losing power, what's going on? Turns out, I think on the straight, his DRS wouldn't open for some reason. He of course can't really see that's the case, therefore he just thought he didn't have enough power on the straights, and I believe by the time he got to turn 2, turn 3, he realised he was kind of way down on where he would need to be, and then kind of backed off the accelerator anyway, and settled for what was in the end a rather good P2. And I do think Ferrari are going to be looking at this thing and damn, we have a really good qualifying car here, and Carlos Sainz hasn't managed to put Max Verstappen even without a good fast lap on the second row. Because if it was a front row lockout, in theory, even though it was the same thing in Miami, and it was a very different story by the end of the race, with how difficult it can be to overtake around Barcelona, that would have been best case scenario, right? But only one car in the way of Verstappen in the lead, with the race pace the Red Bull are showing, it's going to be tough, I think, for Leclerc to hold him behind tomorrow. But we'll see how the race goes, of course. This was the top 10 then. So Magnussen and Schumacher, credit to the Haas, really, because, of course, they brought no upgrades this weekend, and apparently you don't need any upgrades to improve. So they're back in the top 10. That was awesome. Riccardo outperforming his teammates. Bottas did a great lap right here as well, just behind Hamilton. So, Hamilton had a bit of a gap, about a tenth of a second to Russell. I thought was rather interesting. He seemed to have that kind of edge on Hamilton all weekend, and that's enough to put Russell onto the second row for the first time this season. Perez between the two Mercedes, so, it's still the same kind of top 6 teams, but at a rather different order maybe to what we're used to. And especially the times between these 4 drivers with Leclerc significantly ahead are, rather exciting, especially because Mercedes believe they have a rather good race pace. As Russell said in kind of post-qualifying, he had another interesting phrase actually where he said, I think it's said right here, we didn't get the tyres in the right window, felt like there was a lot of lap time there on the table. So we believe that the Mercedes guys didn't really get the car set up exactly how they wanted to, don't really maybe fully understand with this new car that they've kind of got now, or with the upgrades they've got coming through, of course, for this weekend, what they need to do on the outlaps to set the tyres up properly and stuff like that. So he reckons there was a lot of lap time, arguably a few tenths of a second on the table. So he reckons that if everything was perfect, he could have even got front row, P2, whatever, who knows. But he does believe there's more in this car in qualifying and in terms of race pace than what was shown in that qualifying session, and he says they've got a real chance against Ferrari. So their expectation is, and Hamilton's as well, that competing with the Ferraris tomorrow is possible. Of course, the last few races, the Ferraris and the Red Bulls just drive off into the distance, and this time around it could be a different story. So they believe the Red Bulls are quicker, they believe the Red Bulls are going to be hard to stop in the race, but the degradation is maybe better on the Mercedes than it is on the Ferraris, and they reckon there's a chance of a podium tomorrow depending on how things go. So they're targeting the Ferrari to take down rather than the Red Bulls, despite the fact that the Ferraris qualified better today. So a rather interesting development I'm sure we're going to see, and of course how easy it is to overtake in Barcelona might well factor in. Now this is of course a very big talking point of the day, because we saw in Miami after free practice 2 when Mercedes seemed to have magically fixed the bouncing problems right on the back straight. It seemed like it was all going well, and they were like, okay, wow, we might have fixed it, but we don't really understand what changed, right? They were kind of, Russell was saying, and the kind of engineers were saying, we don't really know why we weren't bouncing in FP2, we just kind of weren't. And then on the Saturday it happened again, they have to raise the car height, and all of a sudden it's kind of back to where it was, and they were second behind the fields. Now, Toto Wolff says that the team now, after all this work, I'm sure, behind the scenes in simulations, analysing the data, they seemingly fully understand what caused it, why it was happening, and obviously therefore how to deal with it and how to mitigate it. So that was kind of the concern really for many people. They're like, look, if Mercedes can try and continue upgrading, try and keep pushing the car further down to the floor as they possibly can, this bouncing problem is going to come back, it's going to hinder their development for the rest of the year. They believe they've fully solved it, the problems are gone for good, and now they can fully focus on developing the car in other ways, reducing the weight and stuff like this, because that's been Red Bull's key focus. Ferrari are there or thereabouts already, right? So there is clearly plenty of lap time left in this Mercedes, but whether they have enough time to unlock the rest of it, that's a big question mark. But Wolff is definitely confident that is the case.
So it's step by step. The other teams have been able to continue to develop their car, whilst we have been a little bit in a pause moment to find out about the bouncing. So as soon as we can pick up the regular development, as soon as we understand the tires better, now the bouncing is gone, I think we will be catching up.
Do you fully understand why you've solved the bouncing? You don't expect that anywhere else?
Yeah, we understand now.
Oh, right. Okay. Can you shed any light on that for us?
Well, it's simple. It's all an aerodynamic effect that creates from a floor swinging, and it was difficult to come to that conclusion in a scientific way, but the team around Mike Elliott and Jared Murphy, they've done it, and that's great.
And he even said they're in the same piece. I believe we have a race car more than a qualifying car, so we will see how that goes tomorrow. That's certainly been the case the last few races. We'll see how it, of course, plays with these upgrades, but the last several races, pretty much since the start of the season, their qualifying has been tougher than the race has, right? In race pace, they've pretty much always been P5, P6. In qualifying, hasn't always been the case. So maybe a different story than now P4, P6 in qualifying, P2, P3 in the race, right? Who knows? That's going to be the case, but anything really can happen tomorrow. It's exciting to have another team in the mix up there, because because otherwise it's just going to be Verstappen running away from the field every single time. But this track certainly does suit that Ferrari of Charles Leclerc. They're gaining so much time on the Red Bull in Sector 2 that it might be difficult in the, well, especially on that kind of back straights for Verstappen to mount an overtake unless the tyre degradation comes into play, which seemingly is going to be the key factor. One of the Ferrari guys here says tyre degradation here was very high, perhaps the worst of the entire season. We took a risk actually with Charles Leclerc. So this is a kind of a big story here. In Q2, they put Leclerc out on an old set of softs to set a time that they thought was good enough to get him into Q3, and that means that they have another set of fresh soft tyres for the race tomorrow. So that might be a key difference down the line, because I think the hard tyre here might be, of course, the degradation will be lower, but I really don't think there's anywhere near enough grip on that hard tyre for them to actually run it. So they might go for like a two-stop strategy, more than likely with mediums and softs. Who knows what they're going to start on. So we shall see, but it seems like they're preparing that kind of set of soft tyres for tomorrow. So probably a fair few pit stops going on. Strategy is most certainly going to play a key role in the race. And even, Christian Horner says as well, tyre management is going to be important. So yeah, fascinating race, certainly on the horizon. And this, of course, is the grid. So a rather remarkable grid. Still, the top 6 cars are the top 6 cars, but of course, Mercedes now relatively comfortably in the top 6 in qualifying, because that's certainly not been the case recently. Hamilton and Bottas, once again, they're inseparable. They're still next to each other right here. Russell on the second row, the first time for Mercedes this season. We'll see how easily Perez is able to get past if at all possible. And of course, Carlos Sainz, after his difficult start in Miami, can he keep Russell behind? Because he didn't have much like keeping Verstappen behind after he was on the front row last time out. Of course, the Verstappen-Leclerc battle, once again, we've got that at the front. I'm sure there's going to be some more great pictures of these two guys battling it out, because Verstappen's not going to back down and probably has the quicker race car. Riccardo outplaces Norris. We've got the Haas's here as well. So a very intriguing grid, there's no doubt about it. Very much intrigued your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new as always. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.